Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and this is the Abyss Diana Phi. Now I want to thank Abyss for sending this out for a review. Like always, they're not paying, asking, or otherwise trying to influence me to say anything good or bad about their headphones. All thoughts and opinions are my own. So a couple of notes on the build. One, this is only 350 grams, which makes it less than half the weight of a comparable LCD4, 100 grams lighter than a Focal Utopia in a Hyfman HE1000 SE, and a build quality that beats all of them. So this is a leather headband, but as you can see, not a whole lot of padding on there. Now, luckily, because it's such a lightweight headphone, this really isn't a big problem with all but the most sensitive heads. And you can add a foam pad on the bottom portion if you do require a little bit of extra padding. Now on the bottom here, they have 2.5 millimeter inputs that are proprietary, but you can fit a lot of aftermarket 2.5 millimeter inputs if you do choose to do that. Now regarding comfort for this, the pad change to the DMS modded pads are something that I think are very necessary for this, for my particular head. See, originally, when you get the stock pads on here, there's a lot of pressure kind of in the temple area. So what the DMS pads do is they kind of fill at the bottom and the back area to make a more even pressure on the pad itself. And this makes for actually a pretty comfortable headphone where I'm finally able to take advantage of the lightweight nature of this. Now this is CNC'd aluminum that is finished in a ceramic coating, and it has a build quality that would make Da Vinci weep. So for amplification, you're actually gonna want something pretty substantial for this. Now, you don't need something totally substantial. You need something with a fair bit of power, something probably equivalent to like a 789 or an 887 is going to be what I consider to be good enough to get the job done. But if you want to go above and beyond and really get what this is capable of, I think you're going to want some serious amplification. So what we have here is the iFi IDSD DAC running RCA into the iCan. And for that, I'm just running solid state. And then I have the balance output going into this WA33 from Woo Audio. So these, obviously they give distinct different sounds, but the reason why you'd want something like this is because this is what would be classically known as a transparent headphone. And what a transparent headphone is something that can show you the quality or the characteristics of the gear that you are running to drive it. So you're gonna notice changes on just about every amplifier. Now beyond that, I think with this, you want a lot of power, and that's gonna be kind of the biggest thing that I am gonna recommend with this. Just push the biggest amp you can towards it, and you're gonna be rewarded with a sound that goes from really, really good to really coming alive and coming into what it's fully capable of. That made the biggest difference. Now the tubes here, and we'll talk about this a little bit. This amp is obviously a very high-end amp, right? It's not cheap, it doesn't sound cheap at all. It sounds pretty high quality. Now, while you get a very clear picture with the solid state from the iFi, you keep the clarity of this with going with the WA33, but you add a little bit of extra oomph and guts, especially in the mid-range. So on top of this stellar vocal performance that was coming out of here to begin with, it just adds to that. And I actually think this complements very well, though at a quite substantial price tag. Resolution, timbre, vocals, and imaging, I think are the four tenets that I would describe this headphone follows the closest. Those seem to be the prioritized things. Everything else, while not seeming like an afterthought and still very good, is not nearly as impressive as those four features. So the first thing you'll notice when you put on this headphone is an overwhelming sense of what I consider to be correctness. This is somewhat similar to the sensation of looking at a really high quality TV for the first time that was shot really well, and they have great color settings on it, and it just pops through and you just get the sense of realism to everything. Now I think a big reason for this headphone's clarity is the timbre characteristics. Now separation normally happens from frequency response and really good imaging and soundstage and staging, but also in this particular case, the timbre characteristics. This makes instruments that would not normally stand out in a headphone stand out more distinctly from their surrounding counterparts in high instrument count songs than a lot of other headphones, even in this $4,000 price category, which makes this particularly impressive. And this is probably the best reference for timbre I think I've heard. Everything, no matter what you're listening to, sounds absolutely again, correct. Not saying that it is, but it gives you that feeling, that overwhelming sense of correctness. Now, resolution is king on this headphone. Every pop and tick has its place. Now, I think what's most surprising about this is that this tuning was able to be accomplished without something that I would deem as overly sharp. Now, at the core of resolution, you have treble response. And while this is not going to beat the HU1000 SE for raw speed, it is going to more than make up in some other categories, like the quality of the color of the treble response. On this, it's vibrant and rich. This is still realistic and still what I consider to be accurate, but it's certainly less tin sounding like the HU1000 occasionally can suffer from. And the quality of those treble regions sort of trickles down into all of the other regions in your music, making everything feel properly finished. Vocals extract the maximum from the imaging capability with this, but it's not going to throw the vocalist forward without the music backing it up. So it's not really going to present the vocalist in a more isolated fashion than what the actual music was recorded like. This can be of a benefit if you prefer the more honest nature of this, but if you really like really forward vocalists, this is sometimes going to be a shade disappointing. Notably, vocals here are not as lush sounding as something like an LCD4, but they do have a clarity that outmatches the LCD4 by quite a large margin. And again, we're going to look at those 4 tenets. Now, on a personal note, taking technicality out of this, taking objectiveness out of this, this is a headphone that I've personally fallen in love with very much so, especially because of the vocals. This headphone has an ability to not sound like anything else while still sounding, again, correct, but also just super unique and enjoyable. So there are a lot of unique things on the market that just do weird things, and this seems to do something unique, but not in a weird fashion. So the honesty in the vocal reproduction of this headphone is not only refreshing, but in some cases, I think it can enhance the vocalist even more than a super vocal forward headphone normally could. And even if you miss out on a little bit of lushness, you get something that meets it with realism and placement, and it sounds beautiful. So the bass response that this thing can extract out is detailed, dynamic, and present, but it's not drawing a ton of attention to itself. I think a bit stronger bass would have been, in my opinion, appreciated and definitely something that I would desire to have. Though it's not to say that this is not bassy, but there are definitely stronger planars on the market right now. Now, imaging is one of the core tenets for this headphone. With a very clear and concise picture, it's actually one of the best imaging headphones around, especially the center image. Now, sound staging, while good in some areas, probably has the most room for improvement of any category on this headphone. And it's because, while great in terms of left and right performance, that's just about all you get. So you get a very headphone experience with this. You don't get a far out staging or far surrounding type of experience like you do with something like an HD 800 or let's say even an Aria. Those areas like the forward representation is really the biggest disappointment for this headphone. It doesn't have a lot of size to the soundstage, though for technical distance on far right and far left, it's pretty good. But again, there's more to soundstage than just far right and far left. Now, the imaging within the soundstage as a combination is incredibly precise and very clear. In every degree that you could possibly imagine from here to here, almost on like an infinite axis between 2 points, is just amazing. However, soundstage as an entire category does have its flaws, and this doesn't do as well as some of the competition. Now, I'm no audio engineer here, but I do think that a larger driver or possibly larger pads might help with this issue. The only counter argument to this is like the HD 800. This driver is far bigger than that, and that can soundstage quite wide and quite far in terms of depth. But a lot of the big planars that have really good soundstage all also have really big drivers in them. So I do wonder if a bigger driver might be able to aid in this, or maybe angling the driver slightly more. I'm curious what they could come up with to potentially fix this issue, if that's something that they are seeing as an issue for them. So who is this for? Bass heads? Not really. Soundstage seekers? No. But it is for somebody who's seeking a very non-gimmicky, clear, highly resolving sound. Like listening to music in 8K is kind of what this is like. And in certain respects, It is very impressive. And in those respects, I actually think it is worth the asking price because it is that far above most other things. Got some room for improvement, like every headphone on the market today, but overall, a very impressive picture. So the conclusions to all this. I started out a little bit apprehensive, to be completely honest. I heard these a couple years ago at a show, which is a horrible listening environment, but that was the only experience I had with these, and I thought they sounded just okay. They sounded clear, they sounded vibrant, but there wasn't anything that really stood out as being spectacular on the showroom environment, which again, is a pretty awful place to judge headphones. But when you get these into a quiet environment where you can really sit down and listen, and then you have all these expensive headphones like I do to compare against, which I'm very fortunate to be able to do, there's an appreciation for this headphone that I did not have, and I certainly do now.